To begin with, I'd like to thank we're on the traditional territory and work within the traditional territories of Kwon and Kwon. And I want to thank you very much for that. And what we'd like to do, we've had a number of series talking about the claims, self-government, history, and another important part of this effort here today is to talk about the Yukon Association of Non-Status Indians' involvement in the historical land claims and self-government negotiations and struggles that they have in arriving at participation and achieve the equality that they've been demanding for several years with the leadership of Bill Webber and Margaret Commodore, and people like Charlie Eikland, who comes from Beaver Creek. And they were front runners on moving this whole process ahead and working with the status for the Yukon Native Brotherhood and the Council of Yukon Indians. The creation of that, they'll probably talk a little bit about how that was created. And so today we're going to be exploring how the non-status people were affected and how non-status, the Yukon Association of Non-Status Indians' role in the representation of this, all the issues that affect claims and self-government. And so we have today with us here, on my left here, Margaret Commodore. She's the former Vice President of the Yukon Association of Non-Status Indians. And she has joined us today. Thank you very much for that. And Bill Webber, who was very instrumental in providing the leadership of the Yukon Association of Non-Status Indians. And he was president of the association for several years and worked along with people like Charlie Eikland and others. Charlie Eikland was a board member and comes from Beaver Creek area. And he has had a lot of experience in working with the non-status group, and the non-status in the First Nations, Council of Yukon Indians, and Yukon Native Brotherhood. And so I'd like to let them introduce themselves a little bit. Start.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks for the introduction. I just want to add a little bit to my background, my personal history. I've come from the Tagish people of Marsh Lake, and that's my ancestry, First Nation ancestry. And I was adopted by the Tesla people as well. I was Dr. Louie with Tagish, but I'm still Dr. Louie with Tesla. They gave me a name. My name is YANSI, and it has a certain meaning of the breakup of the Sutton River in the spring, so it's got a specific meaning. But anyway, that I was honored to have that name, and I told the other YANSI. But anyway, I had first of all, thank you very much for your interest in this history. We certainly lived through a lot of changes and started, you can see some of the photos that were passing around. We started quite young, and we were pretty ambitious to start looking for establishing our First Nation rights. But I'm from Whitehorse. I'm a Kwon First Nation member, and with Bill C-31, I became a status Indian, although I represented non-status for a number of years. That's some of the complications that come from the Indian Act. But we called Métis, we called non-status Indians, Indigenous, First Nations. We've been called all kinds of names. But anyway, I think we're now settling with Indigenous. But when we first started, there was very little recognition for non-status Indians. And anyway, I don't want to get into the long story, but I've got an hour to do it, and I'll just let Charlie introduce himself, and we'll get on with the program.
Yeah, nice to see everybody here. I've been involved in YANSI for years, and I was the president of the North Highway Group, which we helped a lot of membership with building porches, and we also built some small houses for them when we had the YANSI organization. Since that kind of went sideways. Now we don't seem to. Nowadays we are following some kind of Indian Act that says that you have to help people that lives on the reserve or lands outside, which I kind of disagree with. I think we need to help people the first people that were here. I was born 50 miles from where Beaver Creek is today, before the highway, and there was no highway up here when I was born up here. No road. We lived in the bush and we trapped all winter and prospected by hand for gold in the summer. And we used to go to Dawson City twice a year, shopping down the White River, down the Yukon River. And back, first time we came to Whitehorse was 1949. Railroad boats were running it and railroads were running. But anyway, I've been involved for a long time. I'm Deputy Chief White River right now, First Nation. I was the Chief of Quanti First Nation also for 3 years. And I've been involved with land claims with Elijah Smith and Harry Allen those for years. And, so I know quite a bit, so I just want to let you know that. Thank you.
Sorry, Margaret, I should have passed it to you by Vice President first, but anyway, there you go, Margaret, sorry.
I said I was probably going to have to grab it out of his hands so I could speak. I wasn't born in the Yukon. A lot of people don't know that, but I became very involved in the Indian movement as it was happening, and being involved with Scoop and Jim, finding out all of the different problems we faced in all areas, status, non-status Indians. And we organized in the early 70s, Billy and Adeline and myself, and I don't know if anybody else was at the very first meeting where we sat down and we formed a provisional organization and an executive. And I was elected vice president at that time. And what we did at that time is we formed locals in every single community so that we could involve all of the Yukon and the people who were involved. And it was really surprising because we knew that there were a lot of things that weren't being done, and a lot of things that we were not beneficiaries of when it came to being a First Nation or being a status Indian. And I lost my status in 1957, and I never got it back for almost 30 years. And we had a fight in our hands. We had a logo, and it was equal acceptance through equal participation for a balanced society. And a lot of you people may not know Frank Lacoste, but he was the one that brought that together. And it was something that we worked for all of those years, because it was a lesson in itself for all of us, just learning about the misery and lack of everything that was happening in the communities. And we worked hard. You know, we put our whole souls in it, because we involved the whole of the Yukon, where we brought them into town to tell us what they wanted us to do and what was lacking. And you know, there's the little booklet that's going out as a list of all of the things that we became involved in throughout the whole time. And you know, and I'm really proud to be a part of it. I'm also would like to thank Yukon College for bringing me up here for this session, because I'm really honored to be here.
Great. There's information being passed around, a booklet kind of showing some of the background issues, the people that were involved in the Yukon Association of Non-Status Indians. Again, as the three gentlemen, or two gentlemen, Margaret have said, it was a struggle. It was a tough struggle. And as we look at the participation from YANSI, they had to work together with the Yukon Native Brotherhood, which represented the status Indian groups. And then they also had to create a new organization to negotiate land claims. And that was called the Council for Yukon Indians. And it had a board of directors, YANSI participation at that level, status board members as well. And so that was the body that moved the claims issues ahead. And as we moved this whole process ahead, we had some major meetings with the Yukon elders. The elders came together in Yukon. They talked about what needs to take place as we move this land claims forward, was to have all their grandchildren included. In other words, we can't have Indian affairs telling who's an Indian, who isn't. And we still have that problem today, as we hear today. I understand that
to it, that a lot of people are not aware of, and a lot of our women lost their status, and they were getting blamed for doing something that was, not right. And there were people who lost their status because, gave up their status because they wanted their children to go to public school. There were also people who gave up their status because they wanted to own a business. Indians weren't allowed to own a business. And there were also some young people who gave up their status when they were young, hardworking young men who were charged for drinking because Indians weren't allowed to drink. And they had some good information, not good information, but information from the cops that if you don't want to get charged all the time for drinking, give up your status. And a lot of our men did that, good, hardworking men. And, as a group of non-status Indians, we had a very difficult time trying to convince not only, other groups in the Yukon, but the federal government that we wanted to be a part of the land claims process. And, I think back to those days and, and wonder at the thing that took place at that time and how hard we fought and how how accepting most people were. But there were a few problems and, we got through them.
Thank you, Margaret. There's so many stories to be told about when we started off, there was no recognition for non-status people or Métis, and there was actually very little services for status Indians. And Elijah Smith was busy at that time in 1971 getting things organized for the status Indians, and he approached my wife Adeline and I, and we were just a young couple making our way in the world, and Elijah said to us, he said, you have rights and you should get involved. And I guess that was sort of the time we started thinking about getting involved, and we didn't know how to go about it, but the next thing that happened, there was no cell phones and stuff, and there was just pretty well walks of telegraph. But we heard there was a meeting happening in the Skookum Gym Hall, and Butch Smitherham came up from British Columbia, and Wally Firth. Wally Firth was a bush pilot at that time, and he was flying a plane for the Indian Esco Association. And anyway, they flew across the country helping organize, and that picture that we're passing around there showed Butch Smitherham sitting in with us, one of the first meetings that we had, and he was telling us how we should go about it. And the government of Canada, under Pierre Trudeau, had started a new funding mechanism, and it was to help it was called participatory democracy. And so there was funding available under the Secretary of State Department, and we had to learn a lot of these things as we went along. But anyway, our first president, George Ask, the interim president, he went to Ottawa and he managed to find out about the funding and started getting the funding in place so we could have permanent officers and permanent office. And basically away we went. We had a board of directors. We were able to help them come into Whitehorse from across the territory to board meetings, and we took direction from the board that provided input from all the communities, and they gave us a lot of good direction, and we raised issues that, you know, at that time the city of Whitehorse was dumping raw sewage into the Yukon River. We raised a fuss about that, and you know, we had started putting environmental issues on the table, and that was some of our early beginnings. And we heard that the status Indians were starting to put together a position paper, and we actually had to go and crash the meeting, and and we said, hey, you're talking about our rights here. You're not doing it by yourself. And anyway, we had a few major conflicts with them. There was no fisticuffs, but a lot of verbal exchange. And we were locked out of a building even, and we couldn't discuss. But there was people that were, actually they had no blood quantum whatsoever of Indigenous ancestry that were sitting in at the meeting discussing what they wanted for land claims. And it was just incredible, the stuff that was going on. And anyway, we kept at it and made representation, and finally we were accepted that, okay, you're going to be equal partners at the table. And so we formed a new organization called the Council for Yukon Indians, and that was sort of the main negotiating body for land claims discussions. And so our rights started becoming a little bit more fleshed out, and I guess resulted in a lot of discussions. It took over 20 years to finally come to a conclusion, and people couldn't agree exactly what kind of a settlement we really wanted. And anyway, the current situation, there's still non-status people out there, and there's still First Nations without a settlement, and they have some troubles with the land claims framework agreement, and so the Casca have been battling for a number of years, and they've got non-status people there as well. Beaver Creek is the same situation. The people in Watson Lake. So there's still some non-status people out there, and there's Métis people up here from other parts of the country too that have a Métis association. But there are ways to get involved, and fortunately these court cases, you know, you heard about the Daniels case. Harry Daniels fought right up at the Supreme Court, and then actually his son ended up concluding that court case with the government of Canada and established that Métis have rights. And there's still a lot of work to be done by the Métis to flesh out exactly how those rights are going to be dealt with, like in terms of programming and all that. So there's still a lot of work to be done. But anyhow, that's a little bit more of the history as I seen it unfold. Charlie, you want to add anything? What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I know a little bit, but well, like I was saying, I can tell you a little history where we were born, 50 miles where Beaver Creek is now. it was only our family and another family living there, and there's no other family. And every time my mom was going to have a kid, she had to go over in the cache and have her baby, and then come back to the cabin again. And there was no road here. Then the highway came through, and then we moved from there to Snag Village in 1945, I think it was, somewhere there, 47. Then, of course, the Catholic Church system come in that year. And they took all my buddies to Snag Village. They took them all, shipped them all over, folks all over the place. This is the Department of Indian Affairs, those years. And then, as the years went on, then the village at Snag, the department in Webber figured it's a long ways to go to Snag, to the village. So then what they did was they moved them out of Snag and scattered them out. Some went to Burwash, some went all over Whitehorse. Of course, they all spoke different languages. Like I speak Upper Tanana language, and other people in our band in Whitehorse speak Northern Catroni, but they scattered them all over the territory by just administration purpose. It was to try to make it simple. They didn't ask people if they want to move, they just moved them all out, just like that. So therefore, I have a history of a lot of negative things that the government has done. They seem like they don't want to recognize that we're the first people that's born up in this country before they showed up. When the highways came into place, that's when more people came into here. I think there was north of Don Jack at that time when I was born up there. I think there was 5 white people living in that area, trapping and stuff. Nobody else. But after the highway came in, everything changed. When we were born, our system is we go after our mother. So us kids that were born before Dad and Mom got married, we had full status. But my brothers and sisters who were born after, they had a different status. They didn't have a full status. The government said, oh, they're not, but they're still full-blooded brothers and sisters. So that's some more of the government red tape that they pushed down our throats in those early days. And they seem to keep doing that all the time. I think we need to have a strong organization to stand up to them. We don't need to say yes to all those guys come in. I have lots of argument with them because they start telling me something. I say, well, you're just a newcomer. You know, I've been here before the road, so don't start stringing me along, you know. They start telling me all about animals, all this and that, you know. I lived in the bush, didn't have no stuff. I never seen a cucumber or tomato till 9 years old. So, you know, start telling me what I should know. Anyway, that's what I thought of being a little history.
I wasn't born in the Yukon, but the 30 years that I spent here became a very important part of my life because I was allowed to be involved in so many things such as YANSI, in trying to do something about our status and trying to get it back. We became very involved in other organizations, and the Yukon Indian Women's Association was formed. We worked very closely with YANSI because they were able to keep their status even when they got divorced, you know, so that's how stupid it was. But I acknowledge, you know, the many people who work with us, like George Asp and Joe Jacko, Frank Chambers, and, you know, Frank Lacoste and Margaret Thompson, just a whole lot of other people who were involved in the whole change that was being made at that time. You know, and there were people like us and so many others that worked together, you know, very serious about what we wanted to see in the Yukon. And, you know, I feel very privileged to be a part of that. And you know, it just makes me feel so good to find out that this is happening, where our stories are being told. And I'm told that this is the fourth one. And if anybody ever wants me to come up again, I sure will.
Yeah, there's so many issues that we faced over the years. I guess some of the legal foundation, at the same time that we were starting to get started, Nishka started a court case, they called it the Calder case, and that's what actually triggered I think the beginning of negotiations, because Prime Minister Trudeau said, maybe you do have rights, after he heard that court case decision, and that's sort of where things started. And anyway, there are so many events over the years that we have to be thankful for, that help make changes to the Indian Act. It's still getting changed. Bill C-31, Bill C-6 or S-6, I think it is now, and there's another change coming in 2017. There was some more changes to the Indian Act, and I guess it needs to be a living document that needs to be amended to meet society's understandings. But you know, it's an old, antiquated piece of legislation that we're dealing with, seems like on a daily basis. But anyway, some of the things that we've seen over the years, you know, the housing was so bad. There were elders living in a tent that were non-status people. They had no support for housing or shelter at that time. And YANSI started organizing, and we put together a briefing for the federal government. We took pictures of the housing conditions that existed for a lot of our people. And there was icicles hanging from the eaves right to the ground, like because of poor insulation of the houses. And there was people with stoves that were burned out that, you know, were fire traps, throwing sparks out on the floor and stuff. And we were able to get support from the federal government to in some cases buy a new stove or help insulate a house, or in some cases we even provided blankets to people because they just didn't have anything. And so those were some of the conditions we faced. Education was another one that our people were really discriminated against with most of the systems. And some people wanted to introduce Indigenous language in the schools, and that was fought. And one of the MLAs that fought it, she went down to defeat not too long after, because it was proven that any kind of language training helps build the building blocks for learning other languages, forcing the issues and getting them on the table. There were so many, even the justice system didn't work for our people. The jails were full of Indigenous people that didn't understand the system in some cases. We helped introduce the court worker program, alcohol and drug services. There was no such thing. And our association started the alcohol treatment program and alcohol awareness, and it eventually ended up the Yukon government created the alcohol and drug services, which goes on today. Yukon housing, I think, was another one that was created as a result of some of our efforts. There was no such thing as social housing in the Yukon. And so I think there was a lot of firsts that we were involved in, and it's good to talk about those things and let people know that we weren't just sitting on our laurels when we were involved in our organization. We've done a lot of work nationally and all. We led the way with land claims discussions, rights discussions. Anyway.
Question about when you went to Ottawa, how the non-status organization, YANSI, received by Ottawa Indian Affairs or whoever, who was the body that you went to?
were involved with the Native Council of Canada. By forming our organization, YANSI, as it was called, we became an automatic board member of the Native Council of Canada. So we sat on the national board, and we made representation to government ministers. We met with CMHC, the head of CMHC. We met with Indian Affairs. We met with all of them, communications, and we were well received as an organization. And it just took years to make our point on a lot of those issues. But it was always interesting to be involved with the Native Council of Canada. They did provide support to us too. One of their field workers, Harry Daniels, he became the leader of the non-status people in Canada and started the Daniels case. But anyway, he was up here doing field work with us when we first organized and helped us create the organization. Communications was another thing that we fought for. We helped bring radio into Old Crow. They never used to honor the right to communications, and so we helped raise the issue about the radio service, and Old Crow got a radio station. And anyway, that was through CBC. And I know there's so many things that's the first that we done. It was incredible. For young people, I just have to respect the new chief at Old Crow that just got elected last week. He's 41 years old, and it's so nice to see young people with that ambition and interest in serving his people. But we were that kind of age when we started, so we just went after it. I was actually in my early or late 20s when I first started, when we were starting to write the Constitution for YANSI. A few of us sat down, and somebody had just finished secretarial training, and they typed up the notes as we were putting them together, actually with Adeline's sister. And the old typewriters, yeah. Anyway, any other questions that anybody would like?
Any other questions? Any questions that people have? Feel free to ask.
Going forward, I'm having for what's related to the upcoming program. Money with
Yeah, I'm an instructor for ATD equipment mechanic in Watson Lake. Started up on January 28th. And I've met with a couple elders, and that is my interest. The question I asked, how can I, as a white man, try to accommodate you? What are you expecting from me to help you to advance the cause of your people, particularly down in Watson Lake or even in Yukon?
That's an interesting question, but I think all citizens have a say in what happens, and when they see issues that are being out on the table, they need to speak up as well when they know something is wrong the way it's happening. They need to talk to their MLAs. They need to talk to their council, and we need to use the due processes that exist in order to help make those changes. So,
I think another important part is education. We just listened to on TV the big pipeline debate, and they're saying, they forgot to deal with the hereditary chiefs, the people that are inherently leaders in those communities. And so now they got to go back and cross that bridge again. and involve all people. That's where participation is important. But how many people understand, what that is? Because when you look at a chief and council, it comes out of the Indian Act. That's where the chief and council comes out. They were created that way across Canada. And so the hereditary chiefs or inherent leaders aren't part of that process. And that's what has to happen now. And we're facing that issue right today in BC with the pipeline debates going on. And they have to involve the people if they're going to get to yes. And that's what's right now it's no. And until you get to yes, you need to involve the people. So I think education is important. The more people understand about what this plight is that Aboriginal people have, the better. I think we have to do that if we're going to go forward in a positive way. Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question kind of about Jordan's principle. I don't really understand how that works with funding for different things for non-status First Nations, but I'm interested because I'm sure there are still so many barriers for you in accessing education or social housing, other things. And Jordan's principle isn't applicable without a status card, and I'm just wondering what you think of that.
As I understand your question about how do non-status people access education, services, and health?
Education.
Well, health services are something that Yukon citizens are enjoying today, quite broadly. So it does include non-status people, and so but registered Indian people still, like the government of Canada, still provide funding through for status Indian people. And so there is a difference there, and in fact there's a difference between the Yukon government support for services and the services for status Indians. And so sometimes with the government of Yukon, they say, well, seniors don't pay anything for medication, and so status Indians may have to go to non-insured health benefits to get services. So it's still not really sorted out really well, and so some people, they get a little bit of support for eyeglasses. So if you're status Indian, you go select these eyeglasses. But if you're non-status, you have to pay for it. And so the last pair of glasses I got, it cost me over $1,000. And anyway, I paid it out of my pocket. I think there was a little bit of support from non-insured health benefits, but I can't remember. Anyway, a lot of those issues have still got a ways to get sorted out.
Any other questions?
Very cool.
Hi, I was just wondering your perspective on how technology can be used to help revitalization of First Nation languages in the Yukon, South and Shakat Media. Can you provide maybe some perspective on that?
Gee, I'm not sure. I think we all pack those phones around these days, and everybody's got their nose stuck in them. But I don't know, maybe the social network needs to be facilitated a little bit more. That's how technology could help out, I guess. But not sure what else. Medical care, even if for non-status people at that time when we first organized, there was no benefit, no health benefits to help somebody, a young mom with delivering children or anything. They had to put money aside to help pay for the hospital costs when they had the child. And so status Indians had that covered by Indian Affairs. So it was just basic, very basic things that occurred.
I'm just wondering how historically, given the prevalence of the Indian Act, how the Yukon, practically alone of any Canadian jurisdictions, was able to avoid having the reserve system imposed on us.
I'm not quite sure I understand your question, but it was ad hoc everywhere in the country. Like some places in the Yukon, there was reserves established. Depending on some cases, the clergy would make representation to Indian Affairs and say, these people need some land here, or else Chief Jim Boss made representation and said, we need protection because our land is being taken away, our game is being taken. And anyway, so there was reserves established in different places. And like I said, it was a real ad hoc manner, and even land set aside in some cases for individuals. But non-status never had that kind of protection or selection of land. It was just the same thing as anybody else. Go and buy it, earn your way and buy it. And, squatters. Yeah. They call them Rhode Island Indians.
You spoke to this a little bit earlier, but I was just wondering, reflecting back now, what advice you have for young people who are working in advocacy and building something that doesn't currently exist. Because there's a lot of structural change that we need to sort of keep building in the Yukon. So reflecting back, what are sort of where did you find your strength to sort of build things like the Yukon Housing Corporation or the early versions of that, the alcohol and drug programs?
Sure. Are you getting at building like Yukon Housing Corporation or establishing that kind of thing? I'm not quite sure.
Well, even just in establishing YANSI, like how did you just decide to do it? Like where did you draw that strength from?
Okay, I understand your question. I guess it was prompting by Elijah Smith, for one thing, suggesting that, hey, you folks have rights and they're not being treated properly. You need to deal with it. And Elijah knew that there was a difference between non-status and status, and he had served in the military, and I'm not sure if he was confronted by it, but some people that served overseas, even when they got out of the army, they were asked to sign away their rights. And just out of the blue, I know one elder, he refused to sign away his rights, and they were going to leave him in Vancouver. They weren't going to give him his fare home from Vancouver to Whitehorse. And at that time, the only way was to either walk the distance or by ferry boat. And he couldn't afford it, but he said, I'll stay here then. So finally, they gave in before the last boat was heading up that way in the fall. So anyway, there was a lot of things, but for society for us to form the society, we knew some basic rules that, okay, you need the Society Act. You need to find out, okay, what's the conditions? And so you need 5 people to get together to form a society. And so it just kind of went on and on. We kind of learned on the way while we were doing it. And then, like I said, we ended up recruiting somebody that was willing to be president for us. And George actually had a lot of university education at that time, and he put it to good use. And when he went to Ottawa for us and negotiated funding to start the organization, and so it was a number of things like that that got our society going. But you know, even today, the Society Act still applies. Like if somebody wanted to take up some particular cause, the ability is there to do it. Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to add a little bit to that because the Yukon is pretty far from everywhere else, and we heard information that Métis and non-Status organizations were starting right across the country. You know, so there were people that were already doing things before the Yukon, and they'd already established a national organization, the Native Council of Canada. So we were also naive. You know, we were thinking we want to do something good. We want to change things. We realized that we did have a way to do that. So we got help from people across Canada who were already doing what we wanted to do, and things were starting to change. And as Butch Butch Smitheram was with the BC Association of Non-Status Indians, and he was working for the government at that time. So at a trip that he had to the Yukon, he sat down with us and said, "We can do this." And we had quite a few people at that meeting, and you know, we all wanted to make changes, but we did have a lot of help from people right across the country. And by the time YANSI ended in the Yukon, I think every single territory and province had established a Métis or non-status organization, including Newfoundland, where we back then, you know, were told they didn't have any Indians in Newfoundland because they were all assassinated, and they ended up also having an organization. They found a whole lot of First Nations people there. So we didn't do it alone, and thank God for that, because we sure had a lot to learn.
Yeah, that's right. One other point I wanted to make about YANSI, when we were getting organized, and as we organized, people started to identify. They said, "Hey, I'm a YANSI." They called themselves YANSIs. And it was interesting because there was no other identity. And we intentionally called our organization the Yukon Association of Non-Status Indians. And somebody said, "Oh, you should be Métis, or you should include Métis in there." But we didn't identify as Métis in the Yukon at that time. So anyway, people started saying, "Hey, I'm a YANSI." But it was cool.
All right, it's getting close to 1 o'clock now. Again, you heard a very important part of history. The organization that YANSI did in creating all these structures and processes that are important. You know, one of the things they started was the Yukon the Yukon Trappers Association, which it's a standalone right now, and it operates, and they focused on the business side of things, making things happen for their own people and working with others as well. But again, I'd like to wrap it up if I could, and thank the three participants for participating in such an important historical event here. And hopefully we'll have others coming forward in the next year, this year, next year, as an ongoing event. So again, I'd like to thank you very much for participating and for everybody coming. Thank you.